Good evening. Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host. Tonight we will explore the question of what happens if you realize you're dealing with a narcissistic personality disordered creature and you actually call them out on it. I bring you this subject as a result of multiple experiences with this type of thing. In addition to my experiences, I also researched specific articles about this type of subject, and this was long before I knew there was such a thing as YouTube channels devoted to this topic. This discussion isn't designed for you to try to diagnose and label your creature as a narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, which used to be called psychopath, or sociopath. The main thing to remember is, doesn't matter which specific variety it is, they're all toxic. They're all poison. If you are being forced to drink liquid in a garage by a masked stranger and he grabs a bottle and you smell chemicals and he starts to shove it down your throat, are you really going to stop him and say, "Wait, is that Clorox bleach or is that drain cleaner?" Because it doesn't matter. Either way, it's poison. Well, if you're involved with such a creature, that's a cluster B, which would be the narcissistic personality disorder, sociopath, antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and you catch on to the fact that this doesn't seem like a genuine person. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have an exact or approximate label for them, but you'll know it's part of this toxic group of creatures. If you've been involved with such a creature and you've witnessed it behaving in ways that indicate it's not genuine, it may be tempting for some of us to say, "You know what, you're a sociopath, you're a narcissist," or any of the names. That, by the way, doesn't usually do any good and typically will result in them saying,
"I'm a narcissist." "No, you are."
And it gets flipped right back around, so it doesn't have any effect. This is one of those things, remember, that you have to realize you discover on your own, and you grow from it. You're not going to get the external validation from this type of creature. That's forbidden as far as they're concerned. If you're involved with such a creature and you start to notice particular behavior patterns and inconsistencies between words and actions, and you say, "Hey, you may have some kind of problem," and you may go through the details, and of course, if you've done that, you know that there's always an answer for it, which could be,
"What about the way that you do this with the trash?"
Bear in mind, nothing was discussed in that example. It's just thrown on to the other person and left alone. There are many different things that can happen if you uncover the fact that you're dealing with one of these cluster B creatures. Now, many of them may already have been familiar with the names that you call them, if you call them, because they've done this more than once. You're not the first one for them to pull this trick on. So it's very likely that throughout their career, criminal life of destroying others, it's been called a few of these names. Again, it doesn't really do any good to say, "Oh, you're a narcopath." They'll simply steer it away because it doesn't go with their narrative. In some instances, if it's someone brand new that you've just seen once or twice and you call out such a thing, or you don't even use the names, you just simply point out the sickness that you've witnessed, it's possible you'll be deserted because these creatures typically have several pots on the stove going at once. So if you happen to fizzle out, so what? There's another one waiting. An example I can use that would be a clue that you're dealing with someone who's not really who they say they are. We know how these creatures love to mirror. This creature meets you at your school and sees that you've got some kind of animal rights sign that you're displaying. When you're in your act of protest to save the animals, this creature approaches you, gives you a compliment.
"Ooh, I like your pen. It says, 'I fight for animals.'"
This person says,
"Oh, I'm just like you. I'm all for saving the animals. I'm pro-animal rights. Yeah. In fact, I don't believe in harming any little living thing, even plants."
if you're an animal rights activist, you really cherish and love animals, and you hear this, it's going to be music to your ears, especially if the person's nice looking and charming, as these creatures usually are. But let's say that's how things begin, and then things progress the way they do. Eventually, down the road, maybe you're living together, and you happen to come in the back door unexpectedly early at one point, and you walk in on your partner on the telephone gabbing away. You hear something like,
Oh yeah, I missed that BB gun. We had so much fun that day at the lake. And those frogs, oh, they all died. It was so funny. That one you hit twice in the eye. Oh, that was great. Oh, yeah.
Let's stop and think a moment. Shooting frogs goes completely against the idea of a person who fights for every living thing's right to live and all that other stuff that it said. That would be a clue to anyone that there's something off here. This person's an animal rights activist, it claims, and it fights for every living thing, but it's talking about a glorified event where it used a BB gun and shot a living frog? Or several frogs? That doesn't add up. So typically, what we would do if we're involved with such a creature who's love bombed us so wonderfully and given us so many gifts, we couldn't possibly want to believe that something like this could be true, that it could be fake. So we may ask, what was that about? You shot a BB gun? The whole thing, it doesn't matter what you say. The creature, if it sees you, it's going to know that you're going to be having some kind of fit because it contradicts whatever it said. But the point is you'll say, oh, how could you have done that? And then be ready for some kind of excuse.
Oh, I was kidding.
Or
that was when I was younger.
And still that contradicts the...
My whole life I've always been for animal rights.
Well, that would be a significant clue that you would point out. And if you've seen multiple clues like this, you may be fed up and to the point where you're saying, look, we need to have a talk. They don't like that line, but we need to have a discussion. I need to know who you are. You told me you were an animal rights person, but I found out that you had done this thing with frogs. That's not right. That's not good. And then, of course,
I told you I only did that because and
it doesn't help you any, because if somebody felt this way about living creatures all their life and then did something like that, it just doesn't fit. But these gaslighting experts will tell you that you're imagining things, you're thinking too much.
What about the time I did this for you?
And try to get you off the subject, and you will realize, oh yes, you did give me that nice gift. Oh, maybe I'm being a bit too bitchy. No, you're not. It's possible that throughout this relationship, you may get to the point where things are routine and you're noticing more of these sickening behaviors, and they're painting an overall picture of a seriously toxic person. They'll always try to give you excuses to explain their way out of it, whatever they did, and you'll want to believe them in many cases because of all the great things that they've done that was fake, that were fake. But what can happen is if this creature values you, not for you, but for what you represent to them, like if you're a stable person that accompanies him or her in public regularly and makes them feel like they're really something because they've got somebody, or whatever the case is, they have a reason to keep you. And if you have noticed these things, like this conversation about the frog, and you're still there with this creature, a lot of times they're going to think, this is fair game. My partner knows what I did and what I said, and it still wants to be with me? Well, fair game. And they actually feel that way, but they won't ever say it to you. They'll just pretend to be themselves. But it gets to a point, in some cases, where you realize this just isn't right. You think if you're a person who likes to shoot bullfrogs, and you find pleasure in that, well, that doesn't fit with the description of yourself you've given me, which right there means there's no relationship. It's fake. You can't have a relationship with someone who's pretending to be something different than what they are. You can have a short one or a superficial one, but nothing deep or romantic. But if you are a kind-hearted person, and you do look at all these wonderful things, and couldn't consider just abandoning ship because of this particular example, for example, you'll be tempted to be pulled into their explanations and think, well, maybe that's true. A lot of times you'll have this feeling in the back of your mind that tells you that there's something fishy here. What can happen is you may study up on narcissistic personality disorder or the others and start to learn some of the tricks of the trade, and you may say, I read about this in my book. What you're doing now is you're projecting. Which, by the way, they will often do because they've been through all this before, and they'll have those words to use on you, so be prepared. And that can disarm you sometimes when you think you've got something to point out, and they do that first. Then when you bring up yours, it'll sound like you're copying them or some other excuse they'll make for you. But if you're sticking around and you notice these various things, you may start to point them out. Because there's nothing worse than being with a creature who's doing something you can clearly identify, and they pretend as if you're completely wrong. That's sickening. You may be saying, look, you don't have to pretend to be all animal loving. You like to shoot bullfrogs. Just let me know. Don't pretend to be. And then you'll have...
I don't shoot bullfrogs. I only did that because I told you why.
You'll be shot down. Eventually, you may grow a backbone and say, look, you are an animal cruel person. You like to kill animals. Of course, then if they're sticking with you, they might just say,
Oh, there you go again, going on about those things.
and they'll turn your concerns into something to laugh at or to excuse away. It's completely serious to you, and you're actually feeling, okay, here's more proof that you're an animal killer. I found out that you wrote this in your diary about murdering a bunch of rabbits once or something. I know you're cruel. They'll, of course,
Would you stop it? Would you drop it? Stop talking about this.
they can't discuss it and resolve it, and they would have a lot to explain, but they don't know how. They're not in touch with them, so in that manner. So they can keep you around and just see you as kind of a nag, because you keep pointing out things. Oh, look at those animals. Do you have a BB gun ready? You can go shoot those frogs over there?
Would you stop?
Because they're trying to maintain their fictitious persona, and here you are poking holes through it, and they don't like that, so they will react in evil ways, and their mask sometimes slips. But you're simply trying to get to the bottom of things. You've seen enough to realize that something's fishy, and you don't really have anyone else you can go to typically because you're isolated, or if you do go to someone else, they won't understand because they're not part of the situation. It can bind you to this creature and make you feel like you don't know which way you're going because of all the great things and this horrific thing. They can make something out of it, like every time you pass by the animal area and point something out, the person may say that line again.
There you go again, saying those goofy things.
And it'll just be like a habit, but you'll notice they never really address what you're addressing, and you're supposed to then just think, oh, I'm thinking too much, I better enjoy what I have. Or they might pull some kind of trick where they leave you instead of time when you're vulnerable, and then you'll think, oh my goodness, I shouldn't be talking about this. They'll try to get you to walk on eggshells in some cases if they want to keep you, so you don't bring up those things. They'll try to condition you to not bring that up. Every time you do, they'll roll their eyes or do some kind of thing, which is supposed to send you the signal to zip it. Well, the problem is, when you've seen enough and don't want to zip it. And it's very difficult to confront these creatures, as I've stated in many cases before. They cannot self-reflect. They cannot discuss what you've seen and how you've seen it and what it means to you. In fact, you don't even matter to these creatures usually. You're simply like an object for them to use for whatever they need, to have someone to hold their arm in public, to prove to their family that they're worthy of having someone, or to prove to the world that they're worthy because they've got someone like you. Any number of things. These are sick motivations, and typically you won't hear these words from these creatures, but it's disgusting to find out that in many cases that's exactly why they're there, and explains how they can just run to a stranger just like that and then come right back and it not matter. If you're involved with such a creature, you may find yourself going down that road where you start to feel like the nag, even though you have a mystery, you've got clues and clues and clues, and yet you're looking to have it all validated and have the person say, okay, you figured me out, but guess what? It doesn't happen with these types of creatures. So you could have a mountain of evidence to prove this creature was a creature, and it will discount every little thing. The funny thing is, though, if you were talking about the neighbor and how it's a creature, and you listed 15 things, it would be right there beside you saying, yeah, that is a creature, yeah. But when it's itself, a completely different monster. If you think you're involved with one, get away. If you did get away, then celebrate.
Oh, sugar, honey, it's me. The wettest, hottest narcopath you've ever licked. You know it's true.
I'm back to give you some more of my fabulous confessions. Now, when we started to date, there wasn't any type of YouTube channels talking about my kind. I was able to operate in the shadows and get away with what I wanted. Unfortunately, at this time, you all have labels for my types of behavior and types of my peers who use you, pretend to be someone else, get what they want out of you, dump you, and find someone new at the flick of a switch. Well, there was a time after you evidently researched me and the stuff I was doing to you, and you did approach me. Do you remember that? You had the nerve to call me a sociopath. I pretended like I'd never heard such a thing before, turned it all around onto you and said,
What are you talking about? You're the sociopath. Don't call me names. Quit trying to put me down and make yourself feel better.
It's time I confess. Throughout my career with numerous individuals, I've been called everything from a sociopath to a narcissist to a bitch to a cunt to a borderline personality disorder. I've even been called hysterical. Well, that's not realistic. The problem is I'd heard all that before, and you thought you were being so innovative, I just flipped it around onto you and said you're the one with the problem and didn't say much more about it. But you must know, it's old hat. I just hope it doesn't come up with the next one I'm with, and if it does, I just treat it the same. So, you figured me out. You may not know the exact diagnosis that I am. Narcopath is kind of a hybrid term. Narcissist for narco, path for psychopath, because I'm sick. I can tell you this now that we're through, but when we were dating, there's no way I would have told you these things. Besides, I'm working on someone else new now, who's rich, has bigger private parts than you did, and spends money on me like there's no tomorrow, and I love it.
Face the facts, honey. You're missing out because you ain't with me.